Hello, this is The Great Everything and I'm Patrick. I'd like to thank you all for the feedback on the artificial intelligence segment. The article I was mentioning there was part of a pivot I was discussing once with Mark, the friend I created The Great Everything with. This idea that the blog was going to be about, well, here's the things that make humanity great. Here's the values and the ideas and, frankly, the pleasures that make us truly human, and that I'd like to pass on to future generations who seem to be too occupied with their phones to care, but also to any artificial intelligence that might want to take the human project forward. Sarah Kaliski, who you probably know from Anchor, she responded and she linked to an article that she wrote on something closely related, but that I absolutely loved. So go check it out on my Twitter, where I retweeted it, @TGE Magazine. The article starts with a question: can a computer have a soul? Which is interesting in its own right, but then Sarah pivots into another great direction: whether a computer can create art. Sarah thinks not, and she has 2 points on this. The first is that what makes our art great is its flaws. True greatness requires some imperfection. Quote, "It is the imperfections that make us beautiful, and the flaws that we fight to overcome that make our work unique." Now that's brilliant, maybe even true. Think of Beethoven's first universal masterpiece, right? His Third Symphony, the Heroica. It's all about him overcoming his fear of deafness and disease and finding greatness in that struggle. Greatness is ultimately striving against imperfection. But it's also in the imperfection itself, because, and here's a quote from Sarah, "Those imperfections, those flaws will always be present in our work because we are human." Very true, right? Art is trying to reach beyond our humanity, but ultimately it comes from it. And because we are human, we are imperfect, so our creations must also be. I mean, you know how I love Mozart and Raffaello, but I love Beethoven and Michelangelo more because they are more human, they are less perfect. I mean, look at Raffaello, his work is flawless, but there's something about it, that perfection, that means that it conveys less passion, less humanity. A bit like, some of those super fast metal guitarists who to me just sound about as emotionally resonant as an Atari. Yeah, that's an 80s reference, go look it up. Sarah's second point is the most interesting, and it's that computer-made art would be less than ours because it would have less humanity. Quote, "How I imagine computer-created art is that we would marvel at how human-like or better it is than our own, yet it would be void of story and meaning behind each brushstroke or sentence, reducing it to a product of an algorithm. No matter how well an algorithm is written to generate art that looks like the creation of a master, it will never be able to compare to those created by the imperfect mind and hands of a flawed human." Very true, but here's a question. Isn't that only because we think of computer-made art as art made for us, for humans, art within a human framework? And isn't that a bit unfair? To get computers to make, paint human art like portraits of Jesus Christ or compose jazz music, and then compare that to human-made art? And this kind of computer-made art can only be an imitation because it would always lack the background and the cultural factors and, the pure subjective emotion that's required for that art. It would be like, Italian hip-hop, which just sucks. Because Italian hip-hop artists, they learned to rap listening to Tupac records, not by being part of that culture of poverty and street life and racial tensions. I mean, you can rap about sipping Prosecco by the Colosseum, and it might be technically perfect, but it will only be an imitation of the real thing. It will lack the soul that Sarah's talking about. But what if computers didn't make human art, but made computer art? How would that compare to ours? The answer is it wouldn't, because it wouldn't be made for us or even make sense to us. It would be for computers. It would be coming from an entirely different place, totally alien to how we see and understand the world. Remember how a few weeks back, Facebook shut down an experiment after 2 AI programs started chatting to each other in a language only they could understand, and we couldn't? I mean, the exchange was in English, but the words were being used in a way that was like code to us, that we couldn't crack it. It was saying stuff like, I can, I, everything else, balls have zero to me, to me, to me, to me, I, everything else, you, to me, to me. I mean, you get it. Except, of course, you don't get it, because language, like art, comes from a specific culture, a specific way of seeing the world, and crossing those barriers seamlessly is metaphysically impossible. This is bringing to mind what philosopher Wittgenstein said in that beautifully opaque remark about how different forms of consciousness cannot communicate across those barriers in any straightforward way. As he put it, if a lion could speak, we could not understand him.